Greetings, this is Mrs. Baker, and I am taking you through your Act 1 packet. So get it out, get your pens in your hand, get your highlighters uncapped because you want answers. I got them here for you. Plug those headphones in, turn the volume up, and get ready to learn about Romeo and Juliet, Act 1. In your sonnet prologue for Act 1, most important pieces to know are this. Two households, both alike in dignity, fair Verona where we lay our scene, and that we constantly keep having this old problem, this ancient grudge breaking to new rebellion and mutiny. And keep in mind Shakespeare's repetition of the word civil, used twice here, as well as the word mutiny, all contributes to the notion that this is not just a problem between these two houses, it is a problem that affects the entire town of Verona. That will ultimately, in 2 hours' time, result in the pair of star-crossed lovers taking their life. And really, the true tragedy in this play is not that these two kids will die, but that they are blind to the opportunities in which to prevent that ending. Because the word star-crossed here is significant of horoscopes. But here's the thing with horoscopes. They can never, ever, ever, ever be right because horoscopes are based on a very faulty premise. Horoscopes say that the earth is stationary and that everything moves around the earth, when in fact we know that the stars, the sun, the moon, everything is always rotating. So how they calculate your horoscope based on the position of the stars, the planets, the moon is wrong. And therefore your horoscopes are wrong. So while everyone likes to think that Romeo and Juliet are fated to die, that it's written in the stars and it can't be changed, I'm going to tell you they're wrong, because it can be changed. And if you look for the opportunities and you look for those moments where they're making assumptions and acting on those assumptions, you too will see that this story didn't have to be a tragedy. All right. Taking a look at the answers to Act 1, Scene 1. We know that neither side wants to start the fight. The servants who've been brawling because they don't want to get in trouble. The rude gesture of biting their thumbs is just like giving someone the middle finger. And so here they're being antagonistic. They're trying to provoke the other side to fight. And ultimately saying that my master is better than your master. And so this defamation of character, or of their master's character, results in the street fight. And then we get Benvolio trying to come in to stop it because he knows and wishes and wants for good things to happen, that he's a peacekeeper, because he knows they're not supposed to be fighting in the streets. Yet, here comes Tybalt. He comes in ready to fight, and he is against the Montagues, and he is aggressive, and he is the opposite of Benvolio, and very important, this makes him a foil. Now, the lords come and jump into the fighting as well, and as authority figures, as heads of households, these two men, Lord Capulet and Lord Montague, are maybe acting bravely and wanting to join the fight, but really, they're being childish and petty. They are being rash. They are not thinking before they act. They are being irresponsible, and they're absolutely being foolish. These two men should have stopped the fighting. They should have resolved the conflict without any violence. And Lady Capulet even points out to her husband that he is too old and feeble to fight, because she tells him that he needs a crutch, not a sword, to go join. Yet, by contrast, you have Lady Montague, and when she speaks to her husband and doesn't want him to go fighting, she says to him, "Thou shalt not stir 1 foot to seek a foe." She is certainly more caring towards her husband, and she wants him to be safe. The prince finally enters the scene and he tries to break up the fighting, and yet the people do not listen. How do we know? Because he calls them rebellious subjects. And he even says, you don't need a Shakespearean translator to know this phrase. He even says, can they not hear? Will they not listen? And then he calls them beasts. That these folks are behaving like a bunch of animals, which they certainly are. And he uses a word here that may not seem all that significant, but you might miss this word. But how do we know he's angry? Is because he describes himself as moved. He is emotionally moved. Okay, not for nothing, but maybe this prince needs to be a little bit more authoritative, because that word is definitely way too subtle to pick up on. The Montagues and Capulets have fought in the street 3 times. They've disturbed the peace. And how did all these fights get started? They were bred of an airy word, which really means they were started by an insult. So, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words will make me start a street fight. Now, the prince tries to show that he is in charge, and he says, though, that there's going to be, if there's any more trouble between these households, he will kill them. He will sentence them to death by stating, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. Okay, not for nothing again, but let's think about this from a different perspective, because maybe street fighting between 2 households in the 1500s isn't all that relatable to you. But maybe you could imagine, instead, sibling rivalry. You and your siblings fighting in your house, and your parents yelling at you to knock it off, stop brawling in the living room, and they say, if you do it again, you're grounded for a year. Okay, are they really going to ground you for a year? No, it's hyperbole. And if you keep persisting and they say, oh, I'm going to kill you, are they really going to kill you? No, it's hyperbole. But this problem of this feud is a very big problem. It's been going on for a long time, and we really don't have any good solutions yet. All right, review some of these questions here. What's a pun? We get plenty of puns for a play that seems to be a tragedy. We start off with a lot of comedy as Samson and Gregory are punning, coming down the street, and they are making jokes which are rather inappropriate about thrusting women to walls and cutting off their maidenheads, and also the word moving, being emotionally moved. If you're not sure of what I'm talking about, go back to the text and take a look. We already know that the insulting gesture Samson and Gregory make to Abraham is biting the thumb, which is the modern equivalent of giving someone the finger. And an aside, often characters will turn to another character and they'll do this little side conversation or a side comment that the audience can hear, but they have to say it loud enough that, of course, the other actors on stage can hear it too, but they're not really meant to hear it. It's just meant to the audience. I already know the answer to number 5, that Lady Capulet says a crutch, that Lord Capulet is too old and he shouldn't be fighting. How old is Lord Capulet? Hang on to your horses, folks, because you'll find out in another scene shortly. But let's take a little closer look at this speech by the prince. You know, he comes running in and he yells at everybody and he says, rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel. Oh, will they not hear? What ho, you men, you beasts. Well, of course, everybody's acting like animals. Everything's chaotic. And then he says that quench the fire of your pernicious rage. Hey, pernicious. That should look familiar. That was a vocab word. Go look it up in case you're wondering what it is. With purple fountains issuing from your veins. Well, it's a bit of a metaphor. Purple fountains issuing from your veins. You know, that your pernicious rage, the fire of your rage, is only quenched by this blood that is spurting out like a fountain. Okay, great. On pain of torture from those bloody hands, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground. Okay, here we got personification. As in the weapons have bad tempers, as if it's the weapon's fault that everybody's bloody. Well, we know not so. And maybe if the prince were more apt to point fingers at who was involved, instead of saying it's the weapon's fault, maybe we could get to the point where we could solve this dilemma. Now we get again that line, 3 civil brawls bred of an airy word. 3 fights started by words or insults. And you also have that alliteration of brawls and bred smack dab in the middle of that line. And he does point some fingers here. He says, by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens cast by their grave beseeming ornaments to wield old parsons in hands as old. Okay, pretty much the gist of all this is that the whole town is affected by this fighting. No one is letting things go, and they just keep bringing it up and bringing it up and fighting and fighting. And that it's cankered, that this is like a disease, a tumor on the peace of Verona. And he threatens them that if you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. And again, this could be hyperbole, this big threat. But notice here how this speech ends. The prince addresses the issue by separating everyone. He sends everybody away. For this time, all the rest apart. Get out of here. You, Capulet, you're going to come with me. And then Montague, you're going to come separately this afternoon so that we can hear this case some more and come to a judgment. But he doesn't try to mediate the situation with both parties there. He separates them, and I don't think we're ever going to get to the root of the problem when everybody's separate. And so think about this. Is this really good leadership and conflict resolution skills? I do not think so. All right, so now we switch. Act 1, Scene 2, we get Lord and Lady Montague speak with Benvolio right after the street fight. This is still a bit of continuation of Scene 1, that Lord Montague asks Benvolio, what the heck happened? How'd this all get started? And Benvolio is very truthful. He says, you know, to paraphrase, that the servants on both sides were involved. He tried to break it up. Then Tybalt got involved, and they started fighting again until the prince finally stopped the fighting. And Lady Montague is worried about her son Romeo and asks, where was he? And Benvolio says, well, this morning, after I got up early in the morning, I went walking on the west side of the city, underneath a grove of sycamores. So early did I see your son. So, was Romeo at the fray or the street brawl? Nope. But the Montagues are still worried about Romeo. Here's why. Because he's acting depressed. He won't talk openly about what's bothering him. He hides in his room. He makes an artificial night by closing his curtains. And here Lord Montague describes his behavior. He says, many a morning hath he been there seen in the sycamore grove, with tears augmenting the fresh morning dew, tears adding to the dew that is on the grass and on the plants and leaves, adding clouds to more clouds with his deep sighs. But also soon as the all-cheering sun comes up, should in the furthest east begin to draw, that Romeo runs away and he steals home, and private in his chamber pens himself up, shuts his window, locks fair daylight out, and makes an artificial night. And his dad knows. Black and portentous must this humor prove, unless good counsel may the cause remove. And notice we get the rhyming couplet here. That would be an audio cue to the audience. The illiterate audience that does not have a book in front of them, nor would the literate people have a book anyway. Everybody's watching the stage and the action. They're not reading along. So this cue right here tells us that it is significant and it catches our ear. The Montagues leave to allow Romeo and Benvolio to speak, because here comes Romeo. And Romeo is very poetic. He's a bit emotional. He's sensitive. And in speaking to Benvolio, he uses quite a few oxymorons. And he says, oh brawling love, oh loving hate, oh heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health. All of these are oxymorons. Two words that when you put them together, they make sense. And Benvolio, we think, is humoring Romeo and seems to know what the issue is. He knows that Romeo is lovesick over a particular girl, and so he gives him very specific advice. Go check out other girls, Benvolio says. Give liberty unto thine eyes. Examine other beauties. Oh, this girl doesn't love you back, so stop obsessing over her. Go find a new one. And then we switch scenes. Now we are in the Capulet household. Lord Capulet is talking to Paris, who is related to the prince. And Paris has come to ask Lord Capulet if he may marry Juliet. Wow, Juliet's only 13. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. And Lord Capulet doesn't want Juliet to get married yet because she's too young. All his other children have died, and he wants his only last daughter to be happy. And so he tells Paris to let 2 more summers wither in your pride, ere we think her ripe to be a bride. Wait 2 more years, dude. Let her be 15, and then she can get married. And they only have one child, just Juliet now. How do we know? Because Lord Capulet says she is the hopeful lady of my earth. The earth has swallowed all my hopes, but she. There is no other children alive. The earth, this is a euphemism, a nice phrase, the earth has swallowed. The rest are dead, unfortunately. All right, now Lord Capulet says, but, I'm not going to give you a hard no until you go away, because remember, Paris is related to the prince, so maybe, Lord Capulet's not too keen on aligning his family with the prince, but he also doesn't want to make him mad. He's playing the middle here. So he tells Paris, but woo her, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part. Hear that rhyming couplet. So what does he want him to do? He wants Paris to get Juliet to fall in love with him. And then if Juliet agrees, he will allow the two to get married. And how's he going to orchestrate this and set this all up? Well, there's going to be a feast tonight at the Capulet house, a big old wonderful party, where Lord Capulet wants Paris to check out the other girls and make sure that Juliet is really the one for him. Moving on to the exact lines here of the Shakespearean English of Lord Capulet's speech. This is a rather significant passage. In line 9, we get her age as being 13. We also get in lines 10 and 11 how long Lord Capulet wants Paris to wait. 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we think her ripe to be a bride. What does he think? Why does he want him to wait for 2 years? What does Lord Capulet think will happen to girls who marry too young? And the answer is line 13. And too soon marred are those so early made. Now look at that word marred. The word marred looks an awful lot like married. But the word marred here doesn't mean married. Marred means damaged, like physically damaged, emotionally damaged. Are you ready to get married at 13 years old? Probably not. And so he also wants his daughter to be happy again. How many children do they have? We know this from line 14. And then we get the rhyming couplets that appear in lines 10 and 11. In 16 and 17. In 18 and 19. and in 22 and 23 and in 30 and 31. Okay. What's going to happen at the Capulet house tonight? There is going to be a party in line 20. This night I hold an old accustomed feast. It is a mask. It is a costume party. And what does he want Lord Capulet want Paris to do at the party? Hear all see, and like her most, whose merit most shall be. Check out all the girls. Make sure Juliet's the one you want. Look at that. Do you see some parallels here? Some doubles. We got Benvolio giving the same advice to Romeo that Lord Capulet is giving to Paris. We have quite a bit of parallelism here. All right, now, how's Romeo and Benvolio going to be able to get to that party to check things out? Well, we have the illiterate servant. This is used as a plot device to set the action in motion. The servant doesn't recognize them because the families have been fighting for so long that they just do it out of habit. And isn't that kind of odd? Because you would think if you're enemies, you would know who's the son of your great enemy and be able to recognize them. They should be famous to you, yet they're not. And we also learned through Romeo reading the list to the servant that it is Rosaline is the name of the girl that Romeo loves. But she has sworn to be chaste. She has Dian's wit. She has pledged to go be a nun, is what those words mean. So Romeo will never get her at all, no matter how much he pines for her. All right, but Romeo's like, fine, Benvolio, we'll go to the party. How do we know? Because he says, I'll go along to rejoice in the splendor of my own. You may want me to go check out other girls, but while I'm there, I'm just going to stare at that one. Now we switch scenes to Act 1, Scene 3, and Lady Capulet trying to talk to Juliet. And we get a little love triangle going on here that the Lady Capulet wants to talk to Juliet about getting married. And you can tell, though, that the two just don't really have that great of a relationship because Lady Capulet she doesn't know where her daughter is, number one, and she has to ask for the nurse, who's a servant, to go get her. Almost like a nanny is the nurse. And she's uncomfortable talking to her daughter in private. You can see, if you look at the text of Act 1, Scene 3, that they have a much more close, loving relationship, the nurse and Juliet. We already know Juliet's 13, and the nurse and Lady Capulet talk about their memories. The nurse loves to tell stories, and she mentions Lammastide, and she mentions when Juliet was born, and she says that Juliet was born on Lammas Eve. So what's the night before? If Lammastide is August 1st, the night before is July 31st. That's Juliet's birthday. And Lady Capulet says that it's about 2 weeks until Lammastide. So we can figure out the exact date of this play. The play is taking place July 13th to the 17th, approximately mid-July. Now we even get another context clue that we know what year this is happening, because the nurse mentions an allusion. She makes reference to an earthquake that occurred in England in 1580. She says it's been 11 years since the earthquake. And I know this is set in Italy, not England, so you have a little bit of twistiness there. But remember, Shakespeare's writing for English audiences, so they're going to get this allusion. And it was in 1580, 11 years later, 1591 is when this play is taking place, mid-July, 1591. Now, the nurse tells a story about Susan, who that was her daughter. She died, and this is how the nurse became employed by the Capulets, because she was a wet nurse. So rather than breastfeeding her own child, Lady Capulet hired the nurse, literally, to be a wet nurse, to feed Juliet for her, and kept her employed all those years. Now, we can get an idea also of how old Lady Capulet is. We know that they don't have a good marriage, Lady Capulet and Lord Capulet. They bicker. She calls him old. Well, how old is he? Here's the answer coming up soon. We know how old Lady Capulet is, because she says to Juliet, "Younger than you and here in Verona, ladies of esteem are already made mothers. And I was your mom, much upon these years that you're now made." So let's figure this out. If Juliet is 13, how old is Lady Capulet? That means she would have gotten married before she was 13, and she had Juliet before she was already a mom at 13. So that means Lady Cap got married about 11, 12 years old, and Lady Capulet, do the math, 13 plus 12, 11, means she's 24 to 25 years old. Now, we know she wants to talk to Juliet about getting married to Paris. She asks her this question, "How do you feel about it?" And Julie's like, "Nah, I'm not really interested yet. I don't really want to do it yet." But she'll go to the party to check him out because she's being obedient to her mother. But she doesn't really care. Doesn't really care. But Lady Capulet and Nurse, they're excited about this particular match. And they compare Paris to quite a few things. They compare him to a fish, like he's a great catch. They compare him to a book, like, oh, it'll be a great romance story. They compare him to a man of wax. Oh, lady, he's a man of wax, like he's a perfect figure. And they also can compare him to a flower. All right, so just as the Capulets are getting ready for the party, so too are the young men. And we switch for Act 1, Scene 4. We get the Queen Mab monologue, in which Mercutio is Romeo's best friend. He gives this wonderfully long, vivid speech about Queen Mab and what people dream about. Before he gets to the long speech, though, he does give us some joking, because that's what Mercutio does. He's very volatile. He's like Mercury. He's got very quick wit, but he also has a bit of an anger streak. And he does give Romeo some, bantering back and forth. He gives him some advice that if love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking and you beat love down. Don't let love beat you up. Come on, you're better than this. He doesn't like to see that his friend is not feeling so well. And we then also get a bit of puns with the dialogue here that leads us into the speech. And Mercutio joking around. Romeo says, a little bit of foreshadowing, "I dreamt a dream tonight." And Mercutio's like, "Yeah, so did I." Romeo's like, "Yeah, well, what was yours?" Mercutio says that dreamers often lie. And Romeo, quick wit, pun, funny, "In bed asleep when they do dream things true." Well, yeah, that's a pun. How? Because dreaming, you're laying in your bed, lying down, dreaming, and then dreams aren't always true, so therefore they're like lies. This big, long speech of Mercutio's is just an opportunity to spotlight him in the Queen Mab monologue. It doesn't really have too much bearing on the plot, other than it gives an opportunity to highlight this particular actor, give him a spotlight, and it lets us also see what his personality is like. Please make sure that you have read the information, because it'll help you in the future. Well, Mercutio does get carried away, and at some point the men are like, "All right, Mercutio, enough's enough. Let's get on to the party." And in the next video, let's see, or maybe I'll give it to you now. Nope. What do we know about Romeo and his dreams? Yeah, let's talk about Act 1, Scene 5. And I'll let you have these answers here so we don't have to do another video. Act 1, Scene 5, we got Lord Capulet greeting his guests. They're having a lot of fun. He's really enjoying it because it's been a long time since they've last had a party. He's hospitable, he's jovial, he's welcoming, and it's been about 25 years since they've last had a feast and a party. Seems like a long time. Now, if you think back to this information, how old then is Lord Capulet? You do the math, you can figure out that Lord Capulet is in his 50s. Wow, he's twice the age of his wife. No wonder the two of them have issues. And she calls him old. And remember, in Elizabethan England, life expectancy wasn't that long. Now we get the most important moment of Act 1, Scene 5. Finally, we get the lovers meeting. They see each other, and Romeo says, I never saw true beauty till this night. Significant. Well, maybe he wasn't really in love with Rosaline, and now he sees a girl that he really, really likes. Now, Romeo is talking to Juliet, and he gets recognized by Tybalt. And Tybalt sees Romeo, and Tybalt wants to go fight him, and Lord Capulet stops him. And Lord Capulet yells at Tybalt and says, you're going to leave him alone, because Verona brags of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. I will not do him disparagement in this house. You're not going to cause a scene at my party, so knock it off. Now, Tybalt gets really angry. He says he'll withdraw. He won't cause a problem. And it's really quick to, gloss over this and move on, but I think there's really something important here. This piece of information, this one sentence that Lord Capulet says about Romeo, this right here, if this was public knowledge, it would have changed the entire play. Why? Because think about it. Everyone assumes that Montagues and Capulets hate each other and cannot be together. Well, Romeo, if he knew that Lord Capulet had a favorable opinion of him, maybe he won't go sneaking around to Juliet's balcony in the middle of the night. Maybe he would then go up to the front door and knock and ask. And remember what Lord Capulet said? He said, if my daughter chooses the guy she wants, then I'll agree to it. Well, if Juliet then comes to her dad and says, Dad, I love Romeo, can we get married? Come on, this is checking all the boxes. Totally would work. And plus, this would be a great solution to the feud. Have the two kids get married, bring the families together, solve the problem. But no one hears this side conversation except for us. And because Tybalt is angry at getting yelled at, this is going to set some additional conflicts in motion later in this play. If you have any questions about what I've gone over with these particular answers for your Act 1 packet, you better speak now or forever hold your peace. Speak up in class and make sure you've written notes down so that if you are confused, you can get some answers and get some help, either from me or your classmates. Make sure you're always looking things up. Follow your curiosity.